All right, hello everybody and welcome back to the second channel. We are once again going to look at some fan-submitted works. Today we have, I think, an article, a few poems, and a short story as well. So we'll see how long this takes us. Usually the poetry reviews are a little more, in-depth, intensive, longer, so we're going to see how long this one goes. As always, keep in mind, I am not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretations of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself, just keep writing, and for those in the comments, please be respectful. Also, I'm so sorry for any mistakes or mispronunciations of names or words. If I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. So, with that, we're just going to get right into it. This is our first submission. It is an article that was published in Philosophy Now. Let's see. Yeah, the author of the article themselves submitted this. You can see their name there, Jarett Figlin. Thank you, Jarett. A content warning to issue, potentially triggering discussions of homophobia and prejudice of a larger scale, as well as fictional violence. And then some notes that Jarett sent in as well. I wrote this piece in my senior year of high school, and it was my first published piece of creative writing. Awesome. Way to go. I am currently halfway through the first draft of my novel. That's amazing. Good on you, for real, for real. Let's just jump right into the article. So this comes to us from Philosophy Now, from Jarett Figlin. The article is titled The Sopranos. The media we consume can be a means to vicariously experience emotions through fictional characters. The anger and hostility we so often bottle up in our daily lives can rear their ugly heads without consequence as we watch fictional characters enacting violence and hatred upon one another. Okay, so already it looks like we're dealing with the idea of catharsis, which goes as far back as ancient Greece, right? And the idea that this was one idea presented by philosophers at the time, that one of the reasons we enjoy media is because we get to, as the author of this article points out, we get to, where's the word they used? Vicariously. We get to vicariously live out, some of the uglier things inside of ourselves without having to actually perform them. This is part of the surface level draw of films, books, and TV series centered around the mafia. It can be deeply cathartic to watch people so far from our social expectations engage with each other according to their own very different rules. Real mafia figures such as John Gotti and Al Capone gained near heroic status not simply because they organized what people viewed as benefits to the community, but also because those who did behave within societal constraints wished at some level they could be like these figures. If the ideal of the mafioso can seem liberating to those stuck in mundane lives, it is no surprise that media centered around the mafia has become so popular. Okay, so this is a good opening, in my opinion. It's taking an outside-in approach, where you start with a larger concept, and from there you move into what you're actually trying to talk about. So the larger concept here, of course, is catharsis, and that's meant to act as a draw as we get narrower and narrower into media about mafia, and from there, as you can see on the next line, we're going to get specifically into the Sopranos. So that's a pretty good opening. It gives the audience something to chew on, and it also indicates to me, and to any reader really, that even though this article is about the Sopranos, as the title suggests, it's also more broadly about, why we consume media about mafia specifically. So good opener. I think that's a good hook, as well as a good indication of what's to come, but we'll find out. David Chase's acclaimed TV series The Sopranos could reasonably be lumped in with this trend, but that would be to miss what elevated the series above other such works. Alongside its style, dialogue, and characters, The Sopranos was willing to be about something, often several somethings. Nearly every facet of the series necessitated contemplation about the wider world of which, I would say in which, probably, Oh, no, sorry. I should have read the completed phrase. Let me do that again. Nearly every facet of the series necessitated contemplation about the wider world of which the Soprano crime family was a microcosm. So yes, that's written fine, as is. It did this primarily through creating a certain affection for characters the show would simultaneously depict as immoral. While the characters of The Sopranos are fictional, the world they inhabit is not, and if the depraved members of the Soprano and Lupertazzi families seem far-fetched, they may have more of a connection with the landscape of modern America than one might realize at first glance. I want to say real quick, I have not watched The Sopranos. I may have mispronounced that last name. If so, apologies. But more importantly than that, I also want to address, once again, the article, while being about The Sopranos, is also about more than just The Sopranos. And that's almost funny because that's kind of what this whole phrase is saying, that The Sopranos isn't just about the mafia. It's about deeper social commentary, if I'm understanding correctly so far. There was a picture here in the article. I removed it just for printing purposes, but just so everyone's aware. Moving on. Sometimes we're all hypocrites. Despite the connection the audience is likely to form with the various personalities within The Sopranos, one would be hard-pressed to find any member of the family who one can consider a good person. After all, their business is exploitation, and business is booming. Many of these characters hold lofty ideals about America being the land of opportunity, about pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, and hold the American dream in the highest prestige. The irony of this becomes apparent. If these violent, hateful, racist, homophobic people are not perfect representatives of the modern American dream, then who is? The characters of The Sopranos are the embodiment of capitalism in its purest form. Okay, pause there. If it were me writing that, I might rephrase that line more from the perspective of The Sopranos to say, like, because you're right, the author is right. The irony is apparent, right? These people love the American dream, but they've only succeeded because of their presumably violence, hate, racism, and homophobic tendencies. I assume that's the point that's being made. And so I would rephrase it more to the point rather than asking this rhetorical question. But if you've watched these videos before, the previous two videos, I think the first one I mentioned it, I don't love rhetorical questions in literature. I feel like they're usually a little too on the nose, but that's just me personally. The characters of The Sopranos are the embodiment of capitalism in its purest form. They all enjoy exuberant success, but at someone else's cost. The sad truth is that many a modern American utilizes lofty rhetorics about opportunity and individualism to distract themselves from the responsibility they should feel for the subjugation and oppression of others. It is far easier to claim that homeless people are lazy than acknowledge that they inhabit a system that failed them so that others could succeed. Okay, yep, I follow so far. I feel like I'm not injecting a ton of commentary here, and that's just because it's well written. Sometimes you tell a lie so long you forget when to stop. The Soprano family is but the purest distillation of the upper class, and anyone who does not fit the mold that the upper class has set cannot achieve their success, no matter how hard they work. In one of the most tragic arcs of the show, nowhere is this sentiment more prevalent than in the fate of Vito Spatafore, played by Joseph R. Ganascoli. Just one thing to note about that line. The Soprano family is but the purest distillation of the upper class. You could probably just remove the word but there. The Soprano family is the purest distillation of the upper class. I don't know. I mean, ultimately that choice kind of just comes down to personal preference. Spatafore is many things before his untimely demise at the hands of Lupertazzi family boss Phil Leotardo. He was one of Tony Soprano's best earners, as well as one of his hardest workers. If anyone deserved a fast track to success, it was him. Unfortunately for him, this success was not meant to be, as he was also gay. I'm not sure what happened with the formatting there. Sorry, that could be my fault. Regardless. This fact, once discovered, led to his fleeing New Jersey and being disowned by his friends. People who he'd grown to consider family were disgusted at the mere thought of him as a gay man, and a successful mafioso at that. This led to him, upon his reemergence, having to pretend his homosexuality was an illness and that he was cured of it, even to Tony Soprano, who acknowledged how good a worker Vito was. But the mafia ideology as represented in The Sopranos is not unlike that of society at large. If someone doesn't fit the preconception of the powerful of what a successful person looks like, then success is not for them. That line is just written a little bit awkwardly. If someone doesn't fit the preconception of the powerful of what a successful person looks like, I think you just use of one too many times there. You could write it as, if someone doesn't fit the powerful's preconception of what a successful person looks like. And I think that would flow a little better, but maybe that's nitpicking. Unfortunately, in both the show and the wider Western world, a successful person in the eyes of the decision makers is still largely a straight white man. The saddest part about the history of Vito Spatafore is perhaps that even with his success in the family, he could never truly be himself. His only options were to either repress who he was to experience material gain, as meaningless as that is, or to embrace who he was and face being ostracized by everyone he'd ever known. Okay, yep, I'm following. Well written. Good points. This dilemma occurs far more often than many would like to believe, and not only when it comes to sexuality. Huge numbers of successful Americans have had to hide their Jewishness. Almost any early Hollywood production was likely to have a Jewish person at the helm in some way or another, but at the time, few would have admitted their ethnicity. While many would like to believe that the world at large would accept a gay person leading a modern workforce, the likelihood of such a person having to shield their identity in order to maintain opportunities is far higher than most would care to admit. Just as Tony's crew gets to decide who succeeds and who does not in their syndicates, the elites of real society decide who gets to succeed and who does not. The sad truth is that the decision-making process is essentially the same. The core of it is always that those who are different from the decision makers do not succeed. One needn't look far to see who does embody the ideals of the elite, Tony Soprano himself. A good guy, basically. Tony Soprano, James Gandolfini, in essence is a character who lives in death. Nearly all of his success can be attributed to some loss of life that he has caused, directly or otherwise. Even the lives of his crew and his family hang in the balance, waiting for Tony to play judge, jury, and executioner. That being said, evaluating what kind of person Tony is can lead to some painful revelations. I'll say this just before I forget it. So the last page, I was following the logic, and the points were made very clearly and succinctly. I think just one thing that would have helped the points that were being made there would just be some research to show that gay people really are marginalized by decision makers, as the author put it, right? Obviously, that's observable in the real world, right? Like, you don't have to look far to see that gay people, or even, as the author points out, non-cis men, and non-white men, those are the kinds of people who get marginalized because, as it is in America, cis-het, white, straight men are the decision makers. Sorry, I was just realizing it was redundant for me to say het and straight, whatever. All I'm saying is data would help here, because the argument is well written, and I agree with it, in fact. But for those who wouldn't agree, I think data is just the one linchpin that would really bring this argument home. So, anyway. Moving on. From the very beginning of the series, Tony Soprano is far beyond the point of redemption. Apart from the innocent people he has physically hurt and those he continues to hurt, he constantly lies. He humiliates or shuns his loved ones for minor satisfaction, as shown through his various gumas or mistresses, and shows no empathy to anyone apart from babies and animals, as noted by his therapist, Dr. Jennifer Melfi, Lorraine Bracco. Or Brazzo, not sure. In one of the final episodes of the show, he is essentially a sociopath. He feels no remorse for his actions so long as they benefit him, and he puts business above all else. He is also a deeply traditional man, not only in his beliefs, but in his dedication to them. He embodies the spirit of the mafia more than nearly any other character in the show. So long as he is helping his family, both blood and otherwise, all is okay, he thinks. The reason the audience cares about Tony is that his goals are noble, and despite his actions, he is not an outright evil figure. Tony does what he does not because he believes it's right, but because he believes that the ends justify the means. The issues present when considering what exactly are his ends, or the ends of the elite that he represents. Maybe this was supposed to read as the issues present. In which case, I would just replace that word with, like, the issues become clear when considering. Yeah. But even, become clear is kind of an overused phrase. So I don't know. Tough call. And the ends are simply power, the maintaining of power and the gatekeeping of power. Though he claims to care about his family, Tony simply wishes to maintain his power at all costs, crushing his opposition, no matter how familial, whenever he must. Tony continually seeks help for his psychological issues throughout the series. However, in the end, Dr. Melfi and I came to the same question. What would help even look like for Tony Soprano? He certainly will never become reformed, taking solace as he does in his lofty ideals to assuage his own responsibility. But in terms of reforming the family, a change in leadership would not help either. The rigid means-ends beliefs Tony holds have been so deeply ingrained into the family that in order for its systems to be reformed, a total shift in how the structure is viewed would be required. Corruption can only be mended if people become aware of it. The parallels here to American society are apparent enough that I needn't expound on them further. Right, yes, I can agree with that point. It reminds me of, was it Derrida? Or maybe Rousseau? I can't remember which philosopher it was, but there's a philosopher who says that you can't change systems without being outside of the systems. And I think that's sort of what the author is suggesting here, is that the family is already a system unto itself, and to just change the leadership within the family, that wouldn't change the system, right? So I like that argument. This is what makes the ending of The Sopranos so effective. Spoilers, maybe. The cycles of violence, both from the families and between them, are nowhere near ending, even when Tony Soprano is no longer in power. This is simply how the families would continue to exist unless unrealistic action was taken to reform it. Every character in the show lives a depraved existence, so from the moment he first drives out of the Lincoln Tunnel in the pilot of the show, Tony Soprano is doomed. It is of little importance, therefore, who exactly causes the downfall, as much as it symbolizes the fact that an existence as compromised as his, just like a system as compromised as ours, is doomed to failure. When finally Tony Soprano sits in that booth playing Don't Stop Believin' by Journey on the jukebox, it represents the culmination of something that had been brewing long before Tony took the reins, and will continue to fester long after his downfall. Okay, cool. Like I said, I felt like I didn't inject that much commentary. I just enjoyed reading it. I didn't see very much wrong with it. And maybe if I, had seen The Sopranos, I would be able to comment more. We'll read a little bit about the author that was included in the submission. Jarett Figlin is studying psychology at college. He has a passion for existentialist philosophy and political theory and applies these passions to musings on art, history, and the world at large. Thank you so much for reading. Thank you for sending this. And yeah, I definitely see what you're saying in your about section with this article. I think it would make for a good video essay, And if you even perhaps went deeper, cited some more examples, and then, like I said, backed up the arguments with data from the real world, studies from the real world, I think that would really just make this perfect, I dare say. Aside from that, my only real notes just come, as I said, like in the form of nitpicks, kind of. Like, for example, maybe there should be a comma here, but does that change my enjoyment of the work overall? Of course not. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. I agree with it. As far as somebody who hasn't seen The Sopranos can agree with it. But I think the psychology and the political theory that the author has studied really show in this work, even if it was written, their senior year of high school. So awesome. Good job. Thanks, Jarett. It was a good read. And if you want to read this article, you can take a look at the Philosophy Now website. This is issue 57. You can find it by going to https://philosophynow.org/issues/157/the_Sopranos. So really good job. Thanks for sending this in. I enjoyed reading it. With that, we're going to move into some poetry. This is poetry by iiusia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Oh, hang on. The camera is out of focus. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yes, so we have a few poems by iiusia. You can find more of their work at iiusia_ on Instagram. iiusia. Content warning. The second poem mentions the genocide in Gaza, and the third makes reference to death. So be aware of that as we get into this. And there are some Arabic words used in these poems, and the definitions are at the end. Awesome. Good to know. This poem is titled 2013-0519/2023-0726. Belief is a fickle thing, all tissue paper thin. Whenever I would sleep over at my grandparents' house, intertwined between hospital visits, I would be woken up in the cold sweat morning and taken to the basement, where my grandfather would pray for so long that my grandmother would take me upstairs halfway through to have breakfast. Leaving him in the basement, blessing every name he could remember. Ila el Abad el Abidin, Amin. On what started as a 9-hour road trip and ended closer to 14, my grandmother prays conversationally in the back seat as trees fly past the window in an indistinguishable greenish-brown blur, and so it is something passed down, I think, something inevitable. But even so, I believe, Lord, help me to believe. Oh, sorry, I wasn't scrolling down or moving the paper as I was reading. I apologize for that. But let's take a closer look here. So, I wanted to note with the first line, belief is a fickle thing, all tissue paper thin. For one thing, I like the semicolon followed by a colon shortly thereafter. It's just kind of unique punctuation. I feel like you don't get enough of those two punctuation marks in poetry, which is maybe a weird thing to say to start, but I don't know, just what I'm feeling lately. As for the words themselves, belief is a fickle thing, all tissue paper thin. Tissue paper thin, well, paper thin is overused, right? If you ask me. Tissue paper thin, maybe not so much. But even still, there may be another way to put even more of a spin on that line. As for the first phrase, belief is a fickle thing, it's pretty good. It's a decent hook. Maybe there's a more interesting word too, though, besides fickle. I will say fickle is probably better than stubborn. I don't know. Each one comes with their own implications. So some thoughts there on the first line. Whenever I would sleep over at my grandparents' house, intertwined between hospital visits. That's an intriguing line. Maybe that should be the first line of the poem. Opening on an anecdote, I think I've mentioned this in previous videos, that's always kind of an easy way to hook your audience, and then even more so with this parenthetical information intertwined between hospital visits, that shows some intrigue, if you ask me. I would be woken up in the cold, sweet morning and taken to the basement where I underlined be woken up just because it's in passive voice. Maybe, if you were to just write it as I would wake up in the cold, sweet morning, obviously that means a different thing than what be woken up is supposed to mean. I don't know. I'm second guessing that advice, to be honest, because maybe I just, it calls to me because it's detached from whoever is actually performing the action, right? But maybe that's a good thing, and so that's why I'm second guessing myself, because, is it the grandmother, the grandfather? Is it a source beyond that's waking up our speaker here? I kind of like the ambiguity, so anyway. My grandfather would pray for so long that my grandmother would take me upstairs halfway through to have breakfast, leaving him in the basement, blessing every name he could remember. We can refer to the last page here for the Arabic words. Forever and ever, amen, or amen, commonly used to end a prayer. Okay, cool. I love poems that integrate more than one language. Most English speakers could stand to learn a few more languages, at least one more language. No, not everybody, but I don't know. I don't mean to overgeneralize. Anyway, but yes, I like when a poem integrates more than one language. I think it gives something for the audience to chew on, And it's interesting, too, that this information, or these words, are also in parentheses, much like these words previously. So that, to me, as a reader, as an analyzer, it makes me question, how did the author decide which parts were going to go in parentheses, which I think could lend to the meaning of the work, right? On what started as a 9-hour road trip and ended closer to 14, my grandmother prays conversationally in the back seat as trees fly past the window in an indistinguishable greenish-brown blur. One thing to suggest here, maybe including some words from the grandmother's prayer, a little bit like how the grandfather's prayer had this little snippet. That could add more atmosphere to this scene that's being painted if the words were included, at least a fragment, a section of the words, because there is a scene being painted here, and we get visuals, right, with the visual of the grandmother in the back seat, the trees flying past the window, and we could add some more auditory imagery here through actual words, quotations. So that's just a suggestion. Indistinguishable greenish-brown blur, and so it is something passed down, I think, something inevitable, but even so, I believe, Lord, help me to believe. So a little bit of a parallel with the first line as we get another semicolon. I like that. The phrase, I think, it does suggest uncertainty, but is there another phrase that could further suggest that uncertainty without being so explicit, right? Is there a more poetic term than just simply, I think? Personally, I believe that there is, and I believe that if the author were to find that, it would make the poem read all the better. But I do like the sentiment here, this idea of generations, the idea of something being passed down, something inevitable. That's very foreboding. And I like the last line too, I believe, Lord, help me to believe. It suggests an identity crisis, which again goes along with this idea of a generational relationship, right? Is the speaker going to be like their grandparents or not? And if they choose not to be, how is that going to affect them? Or do they even have the choice to be, right? And so I find that very interesting. I believe, Lord, help me to believe. That might not be an explicit reference. Oh my gosh, how did the camera get so blurry? Hang on just a second. Okay, better. It reminds me of a scriptural phrase, which I believe is, it's probably different in each translation of the Bible, but I think there's a guy in the New Testament who talks to Jesus, and he says, I believe, Lord, help thou mine unbelief, I think is the phrase. And so I don't know if that's an explicit reference to that phrase, but if so, and even if not, the fact that I'm drawing on it is fine still. Authorial intent doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. But the fact that I recall that phrase is interesting to me because in that instance, the man who says those words is asking Jesus to heal their child. And so that's kind of a generational thing on the opposite end of the spectrum. So yeah, I think there is a lot here about identity, about familial relationships, descendancy, which I think is really cool. There's a lot of stuff that's working very well in this poem. Next poem is titled, Let Us Discuss Theodore Adorno's Cultural Criticism and Society, 1949, over Arabic Coffee. So upon first glance, it looks like this is a prose poem, which is cool. Let's take a look at it. It's my dad's birthday and my uncle's trade conspiracy theories over kabibet and cheesecake. I hand one of them a piece of cake on the ceramic plate with purple flowers as he says that it's all Iran's fault. I don't think I can fit the dimensions of horror, neither breadth nor width, into self-containment. There is no way with which I can squeeze it all into neat black words, serif, against a white background. To write poetry after Auschwitz is, I think this is supposed to say barbaric, but it says barabric, said Theodore Adorno. If any poetry comes from this, may my hand be cut off, said Auntie J. Krog. To try to make beauty out of suffering is to obscure the horror of that very suffering. It is not right, my aunt pleads, bathed by yellow-tinted lights. Ma'ul ashrar fo ashrar. Poetry tries to find the sense in horror, but is there any sense that does not ring like justification? I keep looking up synonyms for horror. Balasiese, my grandma interrupts. You must all have stories. Let us hear them. The only story I can think of is how yesterday I saw a father kiss his son's limp hand, and when I see my baby cousin trying to jump from the top of the stairs to the bottom without breaking his face, the only thing I can think of is how he could have been lying under the rubble if we had been just a little less lucky. My aunt tells a long-winded joke, and I laugh when everyone does. I don't think my story would be appreciated. We've grown content with silence in the face of horror or terror or abhorrence or abomination or fear. I take another bite of the cheesecake. It melts in my mouth. Okay, in my mind, this is a really effective prose poem. It might come off for me personally that I don't like prose poetry, or I don't like poetry that's written to be more casual or conversational, but that's not always true. I think there are some really great ideas expressed here, and the plain language kind of goes along with a lot of the inner workings of the poem. So let's take a look at it. It's my dad's birthday and my uncle's trade conspiracy theories over kabibet, which, if we look at our guide here, means Syrian dish boiled burgle balls with meat inside. Awesome. So once again, I like the injection of another culture here, another language. And I like that it's juxtaposed with cheesecake. So it's almost as if there's sort of a culture clash going on. And I like that too. I hand one of them a piece of cake on the ceramic plate with purple flowers as he says that it's all Iran's fault. So also, I like that visual. And we have to think in terms of selective detail. Why did the author choose to include what the plate looked like? Why did they choose to include that level of detail? I think that's a worthy question. For one thing, it communicates this sense of wealth, right? That sounds like a very expensive plate, ceramic with purple flowers. And so it suggests, right, that the speaker is in this place of not only safety, but maybe even privilege, perhaps, ? And, you know, they're eating cake as well as kabibet. And so that kind of suggests that everybody in this poem is kind of doing quite all right, at least in my reading. Moving on, I don't think I can fit the dimensions of horror, neither breadth nor width, into self-containment. So that's a pretty well-written line in terms of the chosen words. You might even be able to turn that into a fun little metaphor, like, I don't think I can fit the dimensions of horror, neither breadth nor width, into my rib cage. I think that's a pretty generic example, but just something to consider. There is no way with which I can squeeze it all into neat black words, serif against a white background. So again, good language to describe literally what the the speaker is experiencing. To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, said Theodor Adorno. If any poetry comes from this, may my hand be cut off, said Antje Krog. To try to make beauty out of suffering is to obscure the horror of that very suffering. So this poem is in dialogue with two different authors, Theodor Adorno and Antje Krog. And I like that, I like when poems either explicitly or implicitly are in dialogue with other authors. And as I pointed out, what did I point out? That something here was lending to the piece's overall project. Maybe I'll remember it in a moment. I'm sorry. I marked this line right here because I thought it was very well written. Oh, we're not quite there yet. This line first. It is not right, my aunt pleads, bathed by yellow-tinted lights. Ma'ul ashrar fo ashrar, which means hard to really translate into English, but something along the lines of, is it really possible, evildoers over evildoers, in disbelief? Okay. I like that. And I like that it's actually hard to translate into English. For one thing, it really justifies its place in the poem because, if there's no better way to say it in English, yeah, of course you write it in its own language, on top of just the artistic choice to do that. Moving on to the next line. Poetry tries to find the sense in horror, but is there any sense that does not ring like justification? I think I've said in this video that rhetorical questions are usually on the nose, but for me that should be on the nose, right? That question in particular. I think the author doesn't want to bury the lead there. That's a very explicit question that the poem is wrestling with, right? And I think it's just a good question. That's a really creative, fascinating idea, one worthy of debate. Is there any sense that does not ring like justification? I think that's interesting, right? When you take an idea and you write about it, does that almost legitimize the idea, even if, your writing is meant to disagree with the idea or meant to say something contrary to the idea? So I just like the question a lot. I think it's worthy of consideration. I keep looking up synonyms for horror. Balasese, my grandma interrupts. You must all have stories, let us hear them. So balasese. Oh, without/enough politics. Okay. So for a moment, the group was discussing politics, and then the grandma decides, time to move on. No more politics. Excuse me. The only story I can think of is how yesterday I saw a father kiss his son's limp hand, and when I see my baby cousin trying to jump from the top of the stairs to the bottom without breaking his face, the only thing I can think of is how he could have been lying under the rubble if we had just been a little less lucky. So I will say, this is a good way of saying something without literally saying it, right? I like the visuals of the father kissing the son's limp hand and the baby cousin jumping from the stairs without breaking his face. Those are good visuals, and they communicate exactly what the author is trying to say without them having to say it explicitly. But then it kind of moves into this more explicit line, and I wonder if there's another way to say that that still carries the same meaning. Also, another question, the italics. I question whether they need to be there. They clearly, denote a shift in the tone, in the ideas, in the revelations that the speaker is having. I kind of think the language carries the shift enough on its own without the formatting. That's just my opinion. My aunt tells a long-winded joke, and I laugh when everyone does. So I like that phrase too, because again, it's kind of a way of getting inside the speaker's head without them literally sharing their feelings, where, they're trying to fit in, they're trying to ignore everything going on under the surface, but they can't, right? They recognize that they're just laughing because everybody else is laughing. I don't think my story would be appreciated. We've grown content with silence in the face of horror or terror or abhorrence or abomination or fear. I take another bite of the cheesecake, it melts in my mouth. Okay. As far as endings go, it's pretty good. I do kind of question the need to list each of these words. I do like that the poem ends kind of where it began, with the cheesecake. I think that's a good callback, and it helps illustrate where the speaker is physically, in contrast to where they are emotionally. And to that point, I think maybe this phrase could be altered a little bit to suggest, the cheesecake maybe is tasteless. It doesn't fulfill what the speaker would hope that it would fulfill. That would be my last suggestion for this work. But overall, I think this is really good. Really, really good. As far as prose poems go, especially. It says things without, explicitly saying them. It's not just common language broken up by line breaks. No, it's actual substantive ideas. Some communicated very plainly, others communicated more metaphorically, we might say. And that's going to take us to the last poem in this collection. This one is called To Born. And since it's the title, we'll make sure we understand what it means. To born, expression that translates to bury me, used by older people towards kids, usually, as in, I love you so much I don't want to see you die, so I hope I die before you. Okay. Good to know. To born. I have been told by many older and wiser than me that they hope that I will see them die before them, a coffin, with a hammer and a handful of nails, stare at their faces until I can see them on the backs of my eyelids, shove my hands down into the hard-packed earth, and dig them a shallow grave clump by clump. Sometimes I think that I should have passed this wish on, and maybe I would have lived in a house where I am 17 going on 18, and where my sister is 15 going on 16, and where the study is still a bedroom with flower stickers on the walls. Okay, a lot to unpack there, just based on an initial reading. I like that there's no punctuation here. It makes the whole thing seem very stream of consciousness, which I think fits with the tone. The tone sounds a little bit angry, a little bit unsure, almost. Again, I think just stream of consciousness is the right term to describe it. So I like that. Taking it line by line, I have been told by many older and wiser than me that they hope that I will see them die. Build them a coffin with a hammer and a handful of nails. So, based on the meaning of the title, as well as some of the lack of punctuation going on here. So we know that the title means, I hope that I die before you so that I don't have to see you die. But then the speaker has kind of flipped that phrase on its head when they remove context from it by saying, they hope that I will see them die. So they've twisted the phrase, right? They've taken away its positive connotation only to suggest, these older adults just hope that I will see them die. And so it becomes something very sinister. So that's a neat turn on the expression in the title. Build them a coffin with a hammer and a handful of nails. Stare at their faces until I can see them on the backs of my eyelids. So again, horror is expressed through the twist on this phrase. Because when you take the phrase out of its original context, it's like, that is a pretty horrifying thing to say to a young person, right? I hope that I die before you. Like, we understand it with the full context, but it's morbid. It really is morbid. Shove my hands down into the hard-packed earth and dig them a shallow grave. Okay, I like that visual of digging a grave with one's hands, clump by clump. Sometimes I think that I should have passed this wish on, and maybe I would have lived in a house where I am 17 going on 18, and where my sister is 15 going on 16, and where the study is still a bedroom with flower stickers on the walls. So again, this is where the anger in tone kind of comes in for me, where it's this life that the speaker, could be having, if not for extenuating circumstances. We get this view of sort of, average teenage girlhood, and the audience is left to wonder, why has that not come to fruition, right? And what does all of this have to do with this? And this line is the bridge between those two ideas. Sometimes I think that I should have passed this wish on, as if to say, at least I think what the speaker is trying to say is passing the wish on. They wished on somebody else that they would have seen them die instead, right? Yeah. I like the how open it is to interpretation, I'll say that. And I like the way that the two ideas are linked, the two kind of separate visuals and main concepts in this poem. I think they are bridged together by a very interesting phrase, and that's where the openness of interpretation comes in. Overall, I liked these three poems a lot. I kind of think they got better and better, maybe, if I might be so bold as to say such a thing. Once again, I want to highlight the author here, iiusia, iiusia _ on Instagram. Really good stuff, especially from a person like me who just obviously hasn't had to live like this. It's very insightful. These poems are extremely insightful. We're going to move on to our next author. This is called Nearly Deceased Under the Spell of Bound Dead Leaves by Shreyash, Shrelp, Prateek. You can find them on Instagram at shrelpshrelp, SHRELP, SHRELP, Instagram. Let's see, before we get into this one, there is a content warning. Oh, no, this isn't a content warning, sorry. This is just a note that the author sent. They said they don't use social media really, so Instagram remains deactivated for almost all the year. Okay, all right, good to know. With that, we will get into the work. Nearly Deceased Under the Spell of Bound Dead Leaves. So sorry, before we actually get into it, I like the hyphen between dead and leaves, as if to suggest that they are one thing, right? This is not a descriptor, this is part of the thing itself, so already interesting. These strewn around books towering the loom, with their legends foretold and tales entombed, I navigate these labyrinths with a retrograde stride, and these textual catacombs is where I reside. I once was engulfed in the most cheery gloom, when suddenly a voice came from somewhere outside my room. Time, which be fleeting fast, drearily you waste in remembrance of things past. Babble, chatter about incongruous matters is all you do, I infer. Pushing out without a doubt into madness, I concur. Yet did it ever occur, the sadness abound, which you bring about, or everyone around, with the words that you spout from your dastardly mouth? But I only explore the human condition. In the words of your Dante, you are made for perdition. You colloquize with delection about poesy and prosody, philosophy and comedy, rhetoric, logic, elocution, inflection. You assail me, ail me, metaphorically impale me, and leave me in affliction. I heave with a sigh, for I saw with my eye what once was so nigh. You compel me, impel me, to soliloquize. Why did you not die from that pestilential infection? By the way, your alarming alacrity towards this depravity, which you mistake for profundity, makes your chances for fecundity rarer by the day, and your attempts to enrapture a paramour you cur makes me go into a deep stupor. The day hath arrived where I shalt make imminent my thoughts imminent for thee, my eminent other. Who has ever heard something so ostentatiously absurd? Calling you a nerd would be a touch contrite. So I am compelled to cite the words of that dark purple lilac bird. Pray never more upon this earth may someone akin to you ever take birth. Supine you lay on grass halcyon green, and cavort around in this clime serene. with your cohorts bound in real bovine leather, inscribed in black from the tip of a feather, on dead leaves alpine, for these supercilious pleasures of thine, must you leave the decay behind of our natural mother. But why would you care, never even a thought to spare, nary a hint of appreciation, for the flowers or the air? At times of rain, I spend my days in the study. You should be bound to chains in stringent custody. Say, have you read Steinbeck or Beckett? How have you not yet kicked the bucket? Recognizing the genius of Gaddis keeps me alive, I presume. Eh? Have this, a smack on the back from the complete works of David Hume. Lovecraft, Lacan, Lafcadio, Hearn. Just look, there's still so much to learn. Please shut up, your drivel makes even me concerned. You make me sick with the depressing laments of your aren't arrogant Russian gents, with the dolorous chants of your knight errants, those filthy patrician sycophants. With your Harold Blooms and nom de plumes, I'd rather die impaled in a game of joust than ever read even a single page of Proust. Your eloquency lead to this truancy. You should have been smothered in your infancy. Oh, okay. Oh, there's more. Hang on. You libraries are full to the brim. The very foundation is wearing thin. Your future indeed looks mighty grim. Push your luck and it will give in. Return, my child, to your native soil, away from this imbroglio you chose to embroil yourself in, and put an end to this daily toll. A spark, my son, is all it takes, nothing to lose, nothing at stake. Combust, I say you must, turn it all into ashen dust. The shelves, the books, and don't forget the lectern. Cease this plight, you won't regret the sight. Go into the light, for Montag was right. It was a pleasure to burn. Okay, a lot to unpack there. Okay, let's just take it line by line here. Before we actually take it line by line, obviously I think the feature of this poem that jumps out the most is, of course, the rhyme. It is very unique. It's very in your face in a way that I actually like, for real. Again, I just want to highlight the uniqueness, not only of the rhymes themselves. Rhyming sometimes can be easy and it can be generic, but here I didn't see a lot of easy or generic rhymes that, kind of made my eyes roll. There was some clear effort put into this, and I like that. On top of the words themselves being unique, the rhyme scheme, I think it's inconsistent, right? I don't think it sticks to any pattern as far as I can tell. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just want to point out that, from a listener standpoint, it sounds fun, right? There are unexpected turns taken with the rhyme, and that would help keep both a reader or a listener engaged. And dare I say, it reminds me of Ewan's poetry, who we looked at in the first video, just in the way that it's written with the rhyme and rhythm. So, taking it line by line. These strewn around books towering the loom, with their legends foretold and tales entombed, I navigate these labyrinths with a retrograde stride, and these textual catacombs is where I reside. I once was engulfed in the most cheery gloom, when suddenly a voice came from somewhere outside my room. So, the rhythm gets a little bit lost on that last line compared to the previous lines. And maybe that was intentional because, as we pointed out, the rhythm and rhyme don't actually stay consistent. They're kind of played with all throughout the poem. So maybe that was the case, but it is a little bit distracting almost. On top of that, I love the word choices here. Loom and entombed, good rhyme. Stride and reside, good rhyme. Gloom and room is probably the weakest in this stanza, but still not too bad. I think this phrase, cheery gloom, could be improved by replacing cheery with another more unique word. I like the oxymoron. It's just that, cheery gloom sounds a little bit overdone. Yeah. I do really like textual catacombs, both rhythmically and just, from a word choice perspective. That sounds great. Time which be fleeting fast, drearily you waste in remembrance of things past. So again, we get this change in rhyme scheme, which is fun. Fast and past, a little bit trite, maybe. A little bit overdone is more the word I'm looking for. But the line itself is rather interesting. Babble, chatter about incongruous matters is all you do, I infer. Pushing out without a doubt into madness, I concur. Yet did it ever occur, the sadness abound which you bring about. So I know abound is helping a rhyme here that's about to occur. I just don't like it. The sadness abound. It doesn't sound right. It's distracting. I understand literally what it's saying. There's sadness all over the place, the sadness abound. And again, it rhymes with the next line, or everyone around. It just kind of sounds redundant when taking those two lines all together. The sadness abound which you bring about, or everyone around. You kind of said the same thing twice there. If the sadness is abounding and it's also over everyone around, does all that detail need to be there? Personally, I think not. With the words that you spout from your dastardly mouth, but I only explore the human condition. And so this is another thing to touch on here, is that this poem is made up of these italic lines as well as the quotation lines that are not in italics. And so that creates an interesting question of who is speaking and when and to what end. And, what was the context of this conversation? Is there only one speaker? Is there two? So some fun questions. In the words of your Dante, you are made for perdition. So here we get, an allusion to Dante, and we're going to see that there are many other allusions in this poem that kind of fit with the imagery in the poem. The imagery we've seen so far does feel very Dante in the sense that it's kind of macabre, it's kind of academic, right? You colloquize with dilection about poesy and prosody, philosophy and comedy, rhetoric, logic, elocution, inflection. So some good rhythm, some complicated words there with, more than a couple of syllables, and so it reads pretty fun. You assail me, ail me, metaphorically impale me. That line comes off very sing-songy, which isn't necessarily a detriment. But gosh, it reminds me of one song in particular that I just can't put my finger on, and that's why I laugh. Like, assail me, ail me, metaphorically impale me. Like, do you guys hear that? If you do, please tell me what song I'm thinking of, because I just absolutely cannot put my finger on it. Anyway, moving on. And leave me in affliction. I heave with a sigh. Again, that reads as just slightly redundant, like heaving and sighing, kind of the same thing. For I saw with my eye what once was so nigh. You compel me, impel me to soliloquize. Why did you not die from that pestilential infection? So again, the term soliloquize refers to soliloquy, which is a term for like a monologue in a Shakespeare play, more specific than that, but that's sort of the idea. And so again, it kind of calls attention to the chosen structure of this poem, which is fun. By the way, your alarming alacrity towards this depravity, which you mistake for profundity, makes your chances for fecundity rarer by the day. Again, I mentioned this poem reminds me of Ewan's poem that we looked at not too long ago. Those three lines in particular really read like that. And your attempts to enrapture a paramour you cur makes me go into a deep stupor. I like the rhyme of cur and stupor. That's unique. I don't think I've seen that before, ever. The day hath arrived where I shalt make imminent my thoughts imminent for thee, my eminent other. So nice use of homophones, that's pretty fun. Who has ever heard something so ostentatiously absurd? Calling you a nerd would be a touch contrite, so I am compelled to cite the words of that dark purple lilac bird. I underlined the word nerd because it just sounds super out of place with the language that we've seen up to this point. And again, I know that it's all in service of a rhyme here, rhyming with absurd and herd. But yeah, it feels too modern compared to... Too modern, not just too modern, but too casual compared with the rest of the diction here. And then we get another allusion here. Pray nevermore upon this earth may someone akin to you ever take birth. So nevermore is, a reference to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which I think is, what's being mentioned here with the dark purple lilac bird, which is an interesting description because those aren't the colors I would use to describe a raven. So kind of fascinating. Moving on. Supine you lay on grass halcyon green, and cavort around in this clime serene, with your cohorts bound in real bovine leather, inscribed in black from the tip of a feather, on dead leaves alpine. For these supercilious pleasures of thine, must you leave the decay behind, or of our natural mother. So again, just to highlight, you're using the word nerd in the same poem where you use the word thine. Those two things are, of course, going to sound like they clash. But besides that, this stanza, I don't actually have anything to say about it. That was a comment on the last stanza more than anything. I think this stanza reads neat. I like that we have supine up here and then thine down here. And alpine, of course, and bovine. There's a lot to unpack here, which is great. It again illustrates that a lot of thought went into the rhyme and rhythm of this poem. I liked this line in particular, inscribed in black from the tip of a feather. So it again kind of alludes to the metatextual elements of this poem because, it refers to a writing quill. And then on dead leaves alpine. Dead leaves, we saw, was part of the title of the poem, right? Let me refer back to it. Nearly deceased under the spell of bound dead leaves. So this stanza in particular really refers back to this title, right? But why would you care? Never even a thought to spare, nary a hint of appreciation for the flowers or the air. At times of rain, I spend my days in the study. You should be bound to chains in stringent custody. Again, study, custody, that's a fun rhyme, one that I don't think I've heard before. As for this stanza, I don't have much to say about it. Care, spare, and air, one might say, are, kind of generic as far as rhymes go, but I wasn't distracted by them until I took a closer look, so I think it's fine. With this line, I want to highlight shrelp, and the author kind of made sure that we would notice that by bolding the first letter of each line. That's how the author refers to themselves, right? Is shrelp, shrelp. That's their Instagram handle. That's part of their name. And so this stanza in particular might say something about the author. Say, have you ever read Steinbeck or Beckett? How have you not yet kicked the bucket? And the fact that this section of the poem has a hyphen alternating without a hyphen on each line kind of suggests there's a conversation going on here, like this is one speaker and then the next line is another. Recognizing the genius of Gaddis keeps me alive, I presume. Have this, a smack on the back from the complete works of David Hume. Lovecraft, Lacan, Lafcadio Hearn. Just look, there's still so much to learn. Please shut up, your drivel makes even me concerned. So again, it reads like internal dialogue, as if the speaker is talking to themselves and criticizing themselves for how little they have read. That's my interpretation of the stanza. You make me sick with the depressing laments of your errant, arrogant Russian gents, with the dolorous chants of your knight errants, those filthy patrician sycophants. With your herald blooms and nom de plumes, I'd rather die impaled in a game of joust than ever read even a single page of Proust. Your eloquency... Okay, I meant to underline this earlier. I think this is supposed to say your eloquency led to this truancy. This is a very common mistake in English. The word lead, L-E-A-D, refers to the element on the periodic table. The word lead, as in a leader, L-E-A-D, refers to, guiding a group of people. And the past tense of the word lead is spelled L-E-D, not L-E-A-D. And we get confused because the element, it sounds the same, L-E-A-D, lead, on the periodic table. And so a lot of us have grown to think that lead in the past tense is also spelled L-E-A-D, but it's not. This is the past tense of the word lead. So if this line is supposed to say your eloquency led to this truancy, then yeah, just a little typo there. But perhaps it is supposed to say your eloquency lead to this truancy, but personally I don't think so. If that is the way it's supposed to be, it sounds a little bit awkward. You should have been smothered in your infancy. Harsh. And again, it kind of reads like self-dialogue, self-deprecation for how little the author knows, or at least what they've chosen to read rather than what they should be reading. That's my interpretation of the poem so far, is this idea of literature and the literature that we choose to read and how we judge ourselves based on it. So on to the last few stanzas. Your libraries are full to the brim. You libraries are full to the brim. I've read that incorrectly twice now. One tip that one of my writing professors gave me was to read your poems aloud. Now, it could be that the author would not make the same mistake that I have twice now, but if it were me writing this poem and I read that incorrectly 2 times, I would probably just think of changing the line at that point, but maybe not. Anyway, just some food for thought there from one of my professors. You libraries are full to the brim. The very foundation is wearing thin. Your future indeed looks mighty grim. Push your luck, and it will give in. I marked these 4 lines because, to me, these rhymes were perhaps the weakest in the work. It reads almost kind of formulaically. Yeah, I'll just put it that way. Return, my child, to your native soil, away, away from this imbroglio you chose to embroil yourself in, and put and end to this daily toil. So again, I highlighted and because I think it's just supposed to be an. It also reads a little bit weird, going from away, away from this imbroglio you chose to embroil yourself in. I think if you were to remove the comma, then it wouldn't read so awkwardly. Away from this you chose to embroil yourself in. Yeah, because the comma suggests this is a completely independent phrase, but it doesn't read like one on its own. I like the word imbroglio. I can't say that I've ever heard it before, so that's one I'm going to have to look up later. Soil, embroil, and toil, pretty okay rhymes. Embroil is the strongest word there for my money. A spark, my son, is all it takes, nothing to lose, nothing at stake. Combust, combust, I say you must. Turn it all into ash and dust. So there's this call for the subject to leave something behind, in fact, to burn it to the ground. So let's keep pulling that thread. The shelves, the books, and don't forget the lectern. Cease this plight, you won't regret the sight. Go into the light, for Montag was right. It was a pleasure to burn. So, yeah, again, just with my reading of the poem so far, it sounds like somebody wrestling internally with their chosen literature, right? The books that they choose to read. They're wrestling with the idea of themselves as a reader and a writer. And maybe they should leave behind the idea that they have to be an academic and they have to be, well-versed in particular authors, which as a concept, if that is the correct reading of the poem, I can get behind that. I think, restricting ourselves to the canon, I've said this before, restricting ourselves to the canon is a bad idea because, who gets to choose which works even are a part of the canon, right? maybe we should just reform it or dismantle it entirely, and we should just be allowed to read maybe anything, right? Like, if we broaden our standards, or if we just broaden the types of literature that we consider reading, we're ultimately going to be blessed. It's going to be a net benefit, because, a lot of people say, certain genres don't count as real literature, but what gives them the right to say that, I think reading at all is a good thing. Reading literature, right? Not just short form, I don't know, Instagram posts necessarily. But yeah, reading literature in any form is a good thing. It doesn't just have to be the classics, right? Anyway, that's my reading of the poem. I would love to hear if anybody has any differing thoughts there, because that was a lengthy poem with a lot to unpack, so it could be that my line of thinking was wrong there. One last time, we'll highlight the author, at shrelpshrelp on Instagram. And with that, we're going to move into the last work for today. So this is a short story. The author wanted to remain anonymous, which is totally fine. Content warning, this story alludes to child murder, and there is a note from the author, but I might save that for after. Actually, no, we'll have it in mind as we read. So the author, when they submitted this, they wrote, "This is a beginner's attempt at original storytelling and requires a lot of improvement. The main problem I recognize is that I, as the author, know what happened to the victims, but the readers and listeners I showed this to found it hard to connect the dots. So if you could give advice on how to make a story like this more coherent and clear to the outsider, that would be great." Okay, all right, with that in mind, let's get into it. An earlier post about Waterford Witch. Link. Disclaimer, the text references sensitive topics. This is going to be a long post, so strap in. Okay, so already we're looking at it looks like a horror story in the form of an online forum post, which I've talked about before in a main channel video, so we'll see where this goes. My father recently passed away and left us his childhood home in Waterford, ME, where his parents lived in the 70s. We all live in Monroeville, but my family and I went to Waterford a couple of times to visit our grandparents when I was little. When Grandpa died, Dad couldn't find it in himself to go back. They used to be really close. It all happened when I was really young. Besides, by that time, missing children became a problem in the area, so my parents decided to keep me away from there. Eventually, they sent my grandma to a nursing home. I forgot all about Waterford, and the house stood locked up and abandoned for years. Dad was always saying how he was going to sell it. We heard it every month, but he never got around to it. Okay. I know this is in the form of a text post, or a post on a forum or a message board, what have you. That being said, there is still a way to hook the audience, I think. For one thing, the title is a pretty good hook, decently intriguing. But then it's a fine line to walk, because you want realism, right? You want this to read like a forum post, but you also need to hook the audience as a short story. And so maybe opening with the line like, when I was a kid, missing children became a problem in Waterford, something like that, and then give the context from there. I mentioned this in a previous video, but starting the story in the middle is always a good way to hook the audience, right? And then you inject all of this background detail after the audience is already hooked. So there's just one thought. Me and my sister, let's call her Abby, rolled our eyes when the lawyer who read the will said, "Damn me, you guys hit the jackpot," as if any of us could really afford this huge dustbin of a house. The rest of our inheritance would have to be spent on fees if we wanted to at least sell the land to a developer. The thing is, nobody has gone there in decades, even after Grandma died, so all of her stuff and everything had to be cleaned out. Besides, my grandparents operated a small convenience store which went out of business in the 90s, and the lawyer mentioned that all related assets were now stored on the property, so we would have to get rid of those as well. Thanks, Dad. We decided to go there and see the place for ourselves, evaluate the workload, etc., especially since Abby has never been there. She was born after we stopped going. In my childhood memories, it stayed as an enormous mansion with empty guest bedrooms and a bottomless pantry. Okay, so cool setting, an enormous empty mansion, very Fall of the House of Usher. Of course, I heard the rumors. I saw the articles my dad looked up on his computer when Grandma died, read his old newspapers he kept in the attic. Is a comma enough to separate those two phrases? I think maybe you want a period. Maybe nitpicking, but anyway. I knew over 10 kids went missing in the general area of Waterford, and I heard about the satanic panic that shocked the posh Christian community. There were whispers of weirdos handing out drugged candy on Halloween and suspicions of a serial killer in the suburbs. These were the 70s, the golden age of serial killers, and our dad was into the whole documentary thing, taped the episodes of Unsolved Mysteries and everything. I think growing up with one of those mysteries in your metaphorical backyard does that to you. I'd never cared about it, though, since it wasn't my hometown. Maybe that's the opening paragraph. Maybe this should be how you open the story, right? Something akin to this, and then you sneak in all that background detail later, because that's a pretty engaging paragraph, as a matter of fact, in my opinion. Abby and I took time out of our schedules to see the lot together, a nice family road trip of sorts. Loss has a habit of bringing relatives closer. Some of you may have gotten the idea of its appearance from the pictures on local news, but in short, it's a large 2-story colonial-style building with an overgrown garden and a separate garage. As soon as we opened the doors, we realized how much we underestimated the volume of the future cleanup. Mom warned us not to open any packages, and she was damn right. The stench was just indescribable. Aside from thick layers of dust everywhere, the entire living room area on the first floor was filled with boxes upon boxes of badly sealed, expired perfume and cosmetics, skincare, shampoo, everything. The latest expiration date was from the early 2000s. We could barely see the floor, let alone the walls. Fascinating. Okay, so boxes full of shampoo, perfume, and skincare products. Really neat visual, as well as a fascinating symbol. I assume it's a symbol for something, right? With the imagery, and we talked about this in one of the earlier poems on this video, you can almost kind of smell it, right? Expired perfumes and cosmetics. We all have a sense of what that would smell like. And so as a horror element, I think smell is important, right? And sometimes it's used to negative effect because, you know, somebody's describing like a dead body and it's like, oh, the smell was terrible. And it's like, yeah, of course it was. But here it's way more unique than that. It's not a dead body. It's a bunch of skincare products, expired skincare products. So fascinating, really unique as a visual and as a concept. Upon investigation, we found that the guest bedrooms on the first floor were similarly used for storage, but they contained mostly food supplements and some sort of early equivalent to protein powder. We couldn't get to the second floor, but we have gotten the idea by then. The kitchen was the worst of all. It was just full of trash and so many pests that Abby, who has always been the tough one, had to step out for a cigarette. The only thing that stopped me from puking was the fact that I considered going to the bathroom for that, and the thought made me want to die. Okay, that's funny. The first thing we did was hire a cleaning crew. We took turns driving to Waterford every other day to supervise, and I watched them carry out bags and boxes wearing hazmat suits. When the cleaners were done with most of Grandma's cargo and had signaled that the kitchen was no longer a biological hazard, Abby and I decided to join them in case we found in case we found anything valuable. Besides, we both wanted to explore the second floor. I especially wanted to see our dad's childhood bedroom, which I had a faint trace of memory of. That line reads awkwardly. You would say, wanted to see our dad's childhood bedroom, of which I had a faint trace of memory. And even that still kind of reads awkwardly. I think there's a way to just overhaul the line and rewrite it a little more coherently. The wallpaper in the living room was yellow, and it was impossible to tell whether it was its original color or the work of time. Again, that reads just kind of awkwardly. You might want to write it as, it was impossible to tell whether the wallpaper, or whether the yellow was original or the work of time. I don't know, something like that. Also, that's just the wrong form of its. You don't want the apostrophe there. Yellow wallpaper, though, does harken back to an old short story. I believe it's titled The Yellow Wallpaper, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe just The Wallpaper. It's a pretty good short story. You should read it, everyone. Same with the brown carpeting. The rare spots of the walls that haven't been covered by packages have turned light beige from sun exposure. The remaining boxes, which smelled powdery and gross but not as bad as the rest, seemed to date from the 50s, so the cleaning personnel told us not to touch them. We moved on to the second floor, which was surprisingly less cluttered, but bore resemblance to the deteriorating mind of an elderly person. There were signs of unfinished renovation all over the place. One half of the floor had newer wallpaper and paint, while the other was borderline decrepit. Abby was at that point visibly disappointed. I guess my tales about the old family mansion, from my memories transformed by a child's imagination, had proven wrong in her eyes. She kept complaining about how much work it was going to take to clean the whole thing up and make at least $1 of profit selling it. We kept arguing about whether or not we needed to demolish it. She has grown tired of the whole ordeal around the same time I started actually getting into it. To me, this was an adventure, a detour into the depth of my overgrown subconscious, an investigation of the haunted attraction I kept going back to in my dreams. To Abby, this was a putrid old pile of debris, which was why I didn't tell her right away when I noticed an inconsistency in the architecture. You see, the house plan we managed to dig up in Grandpa's old office said there were 3 bedrooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. The 3 on the first floor were the ones I rendered endless as a kid, because I never bothered to count them well, and they were all decorated exactly the same. The ones upstairs were Nana's and Grandpa's bedroom, the office where they kept all their shop stuff, and our dad's old bedroom, except now there wasn't. Sorry, just something I'm considering here. Again, I know this is in the form of an online post, but maybe some dialogue could help the flow a little bit, like rather than saying the cleaning crew told us not to touch the boxes from the 50s, you could just, cut out the middleman and write that dialogue instead. That's an option anyway. A little bit of showing rather than telling, right? Anyway, moving on. If you walk around the house to the backyard, you will notice that an entire side of the building is covered in ivy. It had already been unkempt in my early years, and now you could see the 2 windows on the far east behind it. But I knew that one of them was supposed to be the protein powder room. No comma there. And there had to be a room my dad used to live, right? I looked into each room on the second floor, but they still hadn't been cleaned, so I couldn't see daylight there. Grandpa's office was dusty and full of cobwebs, with seemingly all the furniture and other things from around the house shoved inside, as if Grandma had hastily been making space for her collection downstairs. Their bedroom, where she had spent the last of her sanity days before the nursing home, was the cleanest of all. It contained a bunch of mirrors, all facing the bed. The interesting part was Nana's room was the closest to the missing bedroom, so if I had messed up the plan, her window would be the one covered in ivy, end of story, but it wasn't. I spent days trying to remember exactly what Dad's room looked like. I kept trying to go there in my dreams, as if I could just fish out the full image from my deepest core memories. Despite all my efforts, though, all I could remember was digging through the old toy box, a book with a smiling moon on the cover and the faded blue wallpaper with stars on it. During the day, I forgot all about it, but at night I kept tossing and turning, Googling ways to invoke a lucid dream, just so I could solve this little mystery. All I could find was the name of the book. It was What the Moon Brought. I know, my struggle sounds silly, but you have to understand this was the most interesting thing to happen to me this year, so I savored my sleep deprivation and put my back into figuring out where my dad's childhood bedroom went. At that point, I was the only one keeping watch over the cleaning crew, because Abby got bored of it and reasoned they didn't need us breathing down their neck. When I mentioned the plan inconsistency to her... Did you mean plane? The plane inconsistency? I don't know. She called me a conspiracy bro and said they must have merged 2 rooms for a bigger bedroom when Dad moved to Monroeville and retrofitted the remaining room into the office. I told her about the ivy, but she just rolled her eyes and said it didn't matter because we were going to demolish the house anyway. Then we argued about that again for a bit and called it a day. So again, maybe some dialogue here, right? Dialogue from the argument that the speaker might remember, to really drive home that Abby and the speaker are at a crossroads, right? Moving on. In a week's time, the crew was done cleaning out the dangerous stuff. They called us and said that we can now sort through the valuables over the long weekend. They would come back to throw out everything we didn't mark down, so we had to make it quick. For the sake of our mom, we both went to Waterford, booked a room in the rundown motel on the edge of the town closest to the house, and decided to get this over with. Well, Abby was determined to get it done as quickly as possible, but I still hoped to find answers to my little quest. You see, she was making fun of me for being all Scooby-Doo about it, but the truth is I wasn't taking the room thing seriously at all. I was just desperate to connect my childhood image of Grandma's home to the reality of failed inheritance. Okay. Is there a way to say that that's less subtle? Because people don't often say explicitly how they're feeling in such certain terms, right? A piece of writing advice I remember from a long time ago was, you take your character, you analyze what it is they want more than anything in the world, and then they say anything besides that, right? Because we're complex, and we don't know 100% what it is we want, either until we got it or until we missed it, right? And so, if the speaker wants to reconnect with their childhood, let the audience figure that out for themselves, right? The speaker doesn't have to outright say that. They can say it in subtler terms, like, for example, I don't know, something akin to, you're working a lot with smells, so you could say something like, I wanted to make sure the smell of my dad's old room was exactly as I had it in my nose still. Something like that, right? The speaker wants to reconnect with their childhood. They want to reconnect with their inheritance, their roots, right? Say that in a way that lets the audience jump to that conclusion on their own, because audiences like to feel clever, right? You don't have to spell everything out for them. I promise. So anyway, moving on from there. I didn't remember my grandparents at all, aside from this idealized gingerbread picture from my early childhood. I like the word gingerbread there, that's good. The only thing that could have tethered it all to my lived experience was the presence of our father. I was hoping damn hard that we wouldn't accidentally destroy it along with the building. So again, maybe there's a subtler way to say that, right? The house is connected to the memory of the father, and the son, or the speaker, doesn't want to destroy that. How can they say that in a way that's less overt? When we returned to the now normal-looking house, the first thing I did was check the rooms upstairs. Still 2 of them. I looked at the sizes of the rooms. The bedroom was bigger than the office. As I was mentally calculating whether or not it could have been 2 rooms merged together, I heard Abby call to me from the hallway. "Hey, do you think this mold is coming from the bathroom or the rotten wood?" she asked, barely looking up at me from her notepad. She was making a list of things we had yet to deal with. Excuse me. I turned to where she was pointing and saw round patches of yellow mold on the wall between Nana's room and the upstairs bathroom. It grew in vertical patterns which theoretically could have been either faulty pipes or old wooden planks still hidden in the wall. Must have been what she had been trying to deal with by all this renovation. It emitted a foul smell which in turn could help trace it to the source. After literally sniffing around, making Abby snort and giggle at me, I concluded that it was not coming from the bathroom. To get to the walls though, we had to clean up Grandma's room, so we decided to put a pin in it for now. We ended up splitting up. Abby went to the office to loot Grandpa's library and mark down all the antiques from around the house which were bundled up in there. I busied myself with carrying out all the mirrors from Nana's room and trying to track down the mold. By the time I was done with them, I still hadn't found the source. Hadn't is the word you want to use, not haven't. Unless we are moving back to the present tense, but it doesn't seem like it. Yeah, because the very next line is past tense again. I went back to the motel, listened to my sister talking my ear off about the mid-century modern lounge set, and dreamed of whatever the moon brought. Next day was spent disassembling furniture, long calls with Mom about what she wanted to keep from Grandma's closets, and boxing up whatever we wanted to ship back to Monroeville. After the 3 armoires she had in her room were over with, I finally got to the walk-in closet. Judging by the house plan, I expected it to be much bigger. It fit as much clothes as the armoires. Many clothes. It fit as many clothes as the armoires. Abby went through them hastily, deeming them unsalvageable. It was mostly work clothes and old homeware, all smelling sickeningly of perfume and something rotten. Mom and Abby finished the call, and she put the contents of the closet into a black plastic bag, telling me she was going to the motel to take a shower. We decided to call up a mold expert because even after taking apart the furniture, we still couldn't trace where it was coming from. I agreed, but decided to knock around the walls to see if their integrity remained. That was when I found it. Behind a shoe rack, back by the far wall of the closet, there was a small keyhole which I initially took for drywall damage from a sharp heel. It fit the same key as the armoires. Together we managed to push it open and took our flashlights. Ooh, intrigue. One thing to note real quick, these 2 paragraphs are both very, very long. In fact, a lot of the paragraphs in this story are rather long. And, at least the syntax is consistent, but it could potentially be better for a reader if these paragraphs were cut down a little bit more. The first thing we noticed was the smell. It was the same as the closet and the cosmetics downstairs, but way stronger. The room was strikingly clean and organized compared to every other room in the house. Shelves and tables stacked neatly with jars, boxes, and bottles. I turned to my sister with a grin to exclaim something along the lines of, "See, I knew there was another room. Our batty grandparents just boarded it up," but stopped abruptly when I saw her expression. It was one of shock and disgust. That was when I learned about the thread mentioned on top of the post. Turns out Abby was a little more into Dad's research than I was. She pointed to a cabinet with bottles with labels on them. They were all pretty strong prescription drugs, and none of them had our grandma's name. Right next to it was an entire shelf full of stock-bought candy, Swedish fish, sour gummies, chocolate bars, licorice. I instantly recognized those from my memory of Grandma's bottomless pantry. As a kid, I had thought her pantry was a magical wonderland like the Wonka factory. It didn't take a detective to make a connection here, along with why Dad never really let me roam the pantry. Then there were bottles of the same strong putrid perfume, various herbs, instruments resembling kitchen appliances, and a ton of unpacked soap with no labels, similar to what filled the living room top to bottom. Under the boarded-up window stood a gas stove with a large pot on it. Everything was covered in a thick crust of grease and dust, but behind the shelves of unlabeled cosmetics, I could just make out the old withered and stained blue wallpaper with stars on it. One thing to note, this is a horror story, I presume. This is the first part of the story that's made me feel like real uneasiness, and maybe that's just me personally. I've read horror stories pretty frequently, so maybe I'm somewhat desensitized. But yeah, this is the first part of the story where it feels like the fear factor is kind of kicking in. And that's kind of a long way to go in a horror story without experiencing something unsettling, right? So maybe you could add some more unsettling pieces of information even before this. Maybe make the speaker's dreams a little bit more uneasy. Maybe describe the smell of the perfume in I don't know, maybe more visceral detail. I don't know if visceral is the word I'm looking for, because the perfume in the boxes, that's such a unique visual and symbol. I like that a lot. And I'm afraid that if the author tampers with it in terms of description, it might detract from how interesting it really is. Okay, am I going to be able to find the place that I left off on? Yes, maybe. The bottles, right, herbs, medicines. Under the boarded-up window stood a gas stove with a large pot on it. Everything was covered in a thick crust of grease and dust, but behind the shelves of unlabeled cosmetics, I could just make out the old, withered, and stained blue wallpaper with stars on it. Okay. So the father's room, right. The lump in my throat thickened. Abby and I held each other as if trying to hide from the walls closing in on us with the realization. Entranced, still holding my hand, she approached the old chest in the far corner of the room, the toy box. I watched mesmerized as her trembling hands opened it, then started rummaging through the stuff in panic. The toys were unfamiliar. They ranged from old-fashioned wind-up cars, porcelain dolls and teddy bears to first-gen Furbies, rainbow springs and walkie-talkies. On the very bottom, to which Abby dug hastily, like she knew what was down there, was a book. What the Moon Brought, by Sadie Rose Wheelerstein, published by Jewish Publishing Society, bearing a library stamp and an unfamiliar name and in a childish handwriting on the back cover. I would just remove the letter A there. The mold specialists arrived the next morning along with the sheriff, and before they told us what they found in the walls of that secret room, we already knew the answer. You can read the interview we gave to the Portland Press Herald here, link, and rest assured that Abby won our demolishing argument. Okay, so the author's concern was that the ending was too ambiguous and that it was too hard to connect the dots. In what sense, I wonder? Because to me it seems pretty clear that the speaker's grandmother and maybe grandfather, maybe both of them, they were kidnapping children, it seemed, and hiding their bodies in the walls. And I guess that's why they boarded up the room, right? Was so that nobody would find that evidence. I kind of wondered, there was earlier a warning not to open any of the boxes. I wonder, because I had already suspected, that the grandparents were the culprits of these child disappearances. And so I wondered, are the boxes actually filled with remains? And is that why the speakers were warned not to open them? And did they unconsciously, inadvertently get rid of the bodily remains with the people in the hazmat suits? So that was sort of my theory going into it. And if I might be so bold, that could potentially be more interesting than bodies in the walls, which I think is sort of overdone, in my opinion. This is all opinion. So that seemed clear to me, unless I'm totally misreading this. And it seemed that even as far back as when the speaker was a child, the grandparents were doing this. Which is why there was a book in the father's room that did not belong to the father. And maybe the father was actually involved to some extent. Maybe that's the part that's hard to connect with. But yeah, as far as, what happened to the victims, to me it seemed pretty clear. And to that point, to that concern, I would say it's okay if your audience doesn't follow everything you're putting down, because they might still ascertain something from the story that wasn't intentional. And that's the joy of reading, is that we, can all have unique interpretations. And those who get it will get it, and that's great. And leaving ambiguity is honestly a good thing a lot of the time. Because as I mentioned earlier, audiences like to feel like they get things and they connect the dots for themselves. And so sometimes things just don't have to be spelled out so explicitly. And I think the ending actually does a pretty good job of that, where it's like, the author isn't spelling everything out for the audience. And I was still, able to connect the dots, at least I think I was. And so I would write other bits of the story more like that. As far as the speaker's emotional arc, the narrator's arc, they want to connect with their childhood, right? But then it turns out that their childhood was more gruesome than they could have ever imagined. So where do they go from there, right? They agree with the sister that the home should be demolished, but what are the emotional implications? I feel like we don't really get any of that at the end of the story. So those are my 2 cents on this story. I think I think it was easier to connect the dots than the author might have feared in my reading. If other readers, commenters, if you have other ideas for the concern at hand, then please offer some advice if you got any. But I thought it was a pretty good story. Like I said, I think the horror should have come in a little bit sooner. I think maybe you could start with a better hook and maybe inject some more dialogue and then just pull the narrator's arc through to the end. Let them ruminate a little bit on everything that happened. So yeah, some showing rather than telling. But in terms of how it's written, like the lines themselves are written very well. It's easy to follow. There is a lot of intrigue to be had, which is great. Obviously, you want that in a horror mystery. And I think I like the ambiguity and the fact that, it says an earlier post about Waterford Witch, and it's like we, the audience, never even learn about what that initial post really had to say, besides the fact that, there were missing children in Waterford. So I like the ambiguity there. That's interesting. What might have people thought of this area before the speaker uncovered the mystery here? So those are my thoughts here. Thank you guys for joining me for another one of these. I want to give a huge thanks to the authors who were willing to submit their work to be reviewed. Thank you for your vulnerability. Yeah, we'll be back again next time with another one of these. That's pretty much it. I never know how to end these things. I don't know. Keep in mind this is a rough draft, etc., and so forth. Thanks, guys. Later.